Sovereign Wealth Funds, Global Power, Purpose and Controversy. Author: Idris Babatunde Adeyemi. Introduction. Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is operated at the country's central bank, Norges Bank, recently announced new divestments from Israeli companies, drawing international attention. In August 2025, the fund, the world's largest at roughly $2 trillion, said it would exclude 6 more Israeli firms linked to activities in the West Bank and Gaza. The decision, which was driven by ethical guidelines in parliament, came amid political pressure ahead of national elections, as activists demanded a full pullout from investments seen as funding conflict. Supporters of the fund's process say the rules-based approach helps ensure fairness, but even Norway's own Ethics Council warned that singling out a country can risk politicizing the fund's mission. This high-profile case highlights how sovereign wealth funds can become entangled in international conflicts. What are sovereign wealth funds and why do countries create them? A sovereign wealth fund, SWF, is essentially a state-owned investment vehicle. Governments use SWFs to set aside surplus revenues that are often gotten from commodity exports or budget surpluses, and invest them for the nation's benefit. In simple terms, a SWF acts as a national nest egg, preserving wealth for future generations or public purposes. Unlike private pension funds or central bank reserves, SWFs invest in a wide range of assets, foreign stocks, bonds, real estate, etc., with an eye toward long-term returns and fiscal stability. Typically, a country will channel oil, gas, or commodity windfalls into its SWF so as not to overheat the domestic economy, as Norway famously does, while still earning investment income for government budgets and social programs. SWFs come in several types based on purpose: stabilization funds, to buffer volatile revenues; savings funds, to share wealth across generations; development funds, to finance infrastructure or social projects; or pension reserve funds, to pre-fund future liabilities. For example, a petroleum exporting country might create a stabilization fund to shield its budget from wild swings in oil prices, or a savings fund to convert non-renewable resource wealth into a diversified portfolio for tomorrow. In practice, many SWFs serve multiple goals. SWFs in the global economy. Today, sovereign wealth funds are major global investors. From barely $0.5 trillion in the 1990s, total SWF assets have surged to well over $7 trillion worldwide. There are now more than 100 such funds in operation. The biggest players include Norway's government pension fund Global, about $1.7 trillion, China's main sovereign funds, China Investment Corporation, approximately $1.3 trillion, and others, and Gulf and Asian funds in the $0.8 to $1.0 trillion range, including Abu Dhabi's ADIA, Kuwait's Kia, Saudi PIF, Singapore's GIC/Temasek. Together, these funds deploy enormous capital. Norway's fund alone holds stakes in nearly 9,000 companies globally. Since SWFs invest for the long term, they act as stabilizing market forces, reducing volatility and liquidity risk. For example, during the relatively calm market environment, SWFs historically have made steady gains. In 2024, a survey of major sovereign funds found average annual returns of around 9.4%, making it the second-best performance on record. These returns reflect their patient, diversified strategies, often including a mix of equities, bonds, real estate, and alternative assets. SWFs thus play an outsized role in global capital markets. Their buying power can lower risk premia for companies, making capital cheaper, and provide patient funding in sectors like infrastructure or technology. However, their growing clout has raised concerns. For example, in the mid-2000s, Western policymakers worried that enormous SWFs, especially oil-rich ones, could buy strategic assets and influence foreign economies. Such fears spurred stronger foreign investment screening rules, e.g., the US CFIUS, EU screening mechanisms, and the creation of voluntary governance standards. Domestic goals and geopolitical roles. SWFs also serve different domestic economic purposes. By law or policy, many funds aim to stabilize government budgets and reinvest wealth overseas. Norway's example is typical. its fund immediately invests all petroleum revenues abroad in order to avoid overheating the Norwegian economy with oil money. Similarly, a country might direct windfall gains into a pension reserve fund to pre-fund future retirees, or into infrastructure projects via a development fund. In other cases, SWFs help transform finite resource wealth into long-term financial assets. SWFs can also serve political and strategic objectives. A sovereign fund can be an instrument of economic statecraft. For instance, Gulf funds have famously acquired stakes in international companies, banks, and even sports teams, both to diversify their economies and to project soft power abroad. China's large state funds, such as SAFE and CIC, often support belt and road investments in infrastructure across Asia and Africa. These global investments can align with foreign policy goals, for example, funding overseas projects in friendly countries, while also generating returns. In general, as the IMF notes, SWFs typically have multiple objectives and may shift focus over time. The key idea is that the state can direct these resources flexibly, ideally for the national interest, but this dual role of profit versus policy always invites debate, controversies, and criticisms. Sovereign wealth funds face a range of ethical and political controversies. The major focuses are on their transparency, their influence, and the ethics of their investments. Transparency and governance. Many SWFs operate with little public disclosure. Critics note that the SWF data landscape offers only selective, fragmented visibility, meaning little is known about most funds' investments or management. In practice, while wealthy countries like Norway publish detailed holdings and follow clear ethical rules, other funds remain opaque. To address this, an international group, the International Forum of SWFs, adopted the Voluntary Santiago Principles in 2008, setting best practice guidelines for transparency and governance. However, compliance is uneven. Only a minority of SWFs fully adhere to these standards. National security and political influence. Because SWFs are state-owned, their foreign investments sometimes raise suspicion. In the mid-2000s, major Western governments openly worried that funds like China's CIC or Gulf SWFs might buy strategically important assets, from oil refineries to tech firms, which threatens national security. In response, investment by state funds into sensitive industries, such as defense, is now often subject to tight government scrutiny. Some critics also worry that SWFs could be leveraged for political ends, for instance, by investing in or withholding investment from countries to signal approval or disapproval. Norway's recent example shows the flip side. Ethical screening of investments can itself become a political statement. Ethical and conflict issues. SWFs sometimes hold stakes in companies connected to controversial activities. Norway's decision to divest from Israeli firms demonstrates one ethical debate. Many argued that investing in companies operating in occupied territories violated international law, while others warned that targeted divestment could politicize the fund's mission. Similarly, funds might own shares in arms manufacturers, energy companies linked to environmental harm, or firms in repressive regimes. For example, the UAE's Mubadala Fund originated with proceeds from defense offset contracts, essentially using oil wealth linked to arms sales to build domestic companies. Critics say such ties raise corruption risks, since the defense sector is prone to opacity and illicit practices. Corruption and misuse. Perhaps the starkest warning comes from cases where SWFs were outright abused. The 1MDB scandal in Malaysia is the most famous example. This sovereign fund, meant to spur development, became a vehicle for embezzlement by officials. US and Malaysian authorities found that roughly $4.5 billion was diverted from 1MDB into shell companies and luxury assets for corrupt insiders. The fallout, including guilty pleas by Goldman Sachs bankers, showed how a lack of checks and transparency can allow elites to loot a public fund. Lack of oversight and regulation. Unlike many financial institutions, SWFs are largely under national control, and there is no global regulator. The one international body, IFSWF, can only issue guidelines, not enforce them. This means that abuses or recklessness by a few funds can go unchecked. Policymakers and watchdogs argue that stronger rules or cooperation, beyond voluntary principles, are needed to ensure SWFs truly serve their citizens' interests, not just political leaders' agendas. Conclusion: sovereign wealth funds have become financial powerhouses with growing global influence. By managing state surpluses for long-term return, they can provide significant national benefits, which stabilize volatile revenues, fund future spending, and even advance strategic goals. But Norway's recent decision, set amid a fraught political context, underscores that SWFs cannot escape political realities. Their choices of where and where not to invest provoke debates over ethics, security, and governance. As these funds grow, and as more countries establish them, the world will be watching, which balances the economic advantages of SWFs with the need for transparency and responsible oversight, which will be a key challenge for governments and citizens alike.